So I want to thank him again and again for incredible work. E ele tem muita experiência com a questão da poluição do ar, principalmente no trabalho no Ministério da Saúde no Canadá, Health Canada, que eles chamam, né? E, enfim, está articulando inúmeras redes de médicos, de profissionais de saúde, né? E a nossa grande notícia, que está no site da Organização Mundial dos Médicos de Família, ele foi para Genebra agora e estava na reunião em que o diretor-geral da Organização Mundial da Saúde, Dr. Tedros, falou, né, que poluição do ar é nosso novo tabaco, né? E ele está começando a desenvolver então um trabalho de train the trainers, né? Então, quem quiser depois aprender um pouco mais sobre poluição do ar e passar a treinar outros colegas, né? A gente conseguiu um grant, um financiamento, né? E talvez a gente consiga remunerar. Enfim, é um grande projeto mundial, né? Mas agora eu vou passar a palavra para o Alan, depois a gente pode conversar com ele nos intervalos, ele vai ficar aqui durante o dia. Então, thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So, thank you, Enrique, for introducing me to Sergio, who brought me here. I want to also thank Andy Haynes and Carlos Dora, who I regard as the leaders in the field who've taught me so much. And I want to thank Enrique's family for hosting me and feeding me while I'm here and looking after my body and soul. So welcome, everybody. And I also want to say hello to students. There were some students in the audience. Any students here? Ah, okay. I saw some students, and I love having students. Great. You're the next generation. So my talk is about air pollution. And what I want to do is take you, because I understand many of you are health professionals, so take you from air pollution as it affects your patients, and then talk about it in the global context. And I start with an impressionistic painting from Claude Monet. And why? A beautiful painting. Behind the beauty is the dirt, is the air pollution. So the colors there are because of the particles in the light in the air deflect the light and create these beautiful, beautiful colors. But there's another piece that I just learnt about that picture. The Houses of Parliament on the River Thames. Christine Figueras was talking, she led the climate change negotiations, the Paris negotiations. She was talking in Geneva a month ago at the World Conference on Family Medicine. She talked about how in history, the Thames were polluted by sewage. We used to put our sewage into the Thames, and they were talking about moving the Houses of Parliament because the river was so dirty. And her analogy is that we're doing that with our air pollution. We're putting it into our living spaces, and we have to change that, and we can change that. So I think you mentioned this. The Secretary General, the WHO, head of WHO, called air pollution the new tobacco. And the statistic from WHO is astounding: 7 million deaths because of air pollution every year, deaths, and then harming many, many, many more people. So this is the latest headlines, and what I'm going to explain is what lies behind the headlines. I'm also interested that only few of you are wearing headsets, so English is understandable to most of you. So in your offices, how many of you, or in your lives, how many of you have patients who've gotten sick because of air pollution? Some of you, some, not that many. How many of you have patients who've died because of air pollution? Well, I'm going to explain that to you. Smoking air pollution. Yeah, but air pollution, outdoor air pollution, and household air pollution is the new tobacco. So I'm going to explain that to you, that link to you. This is Porto Alegre. This is what I got off the net. So Meteo Blue is not, this is, it's a private company. It was originally Swiss. and it publishes weather data and has some air pollution data as well. So right here is the particulate levels in Porto Alegre. The gray line here is the PM 2.5, which is the dangerous pollutants. So I'm not sure how accurate this information is, but it was for last week. And you can see that there's some spikes in PM 2.5 that get up to 40 micrograms. Now the WHO safe level is 35. So we're getting, Carlos, 35? 10 annually. Oh, 10 average. But this is the daily spikes. Yeah. 35, yeah. So we're getting, this is short-term effects. We're getting over periods of time when we go over the safe limit. And then this down here is a very important other pollutant called ozone, which is significantly elevated on a continual level. In Canada, when we go over 80, we see tremendous health effects. It's the warning about poor air. Now, how do we know about air pollution? What you have here is a small spike in air pollution, another small spike in air pollution. The researchers can link that spike to the number of people going to hospital or the number of people dying. So they make a correlation between the changes in air pollution and the changes in health status, people going to hospital and people dying. And out of that, you can extrapolate the science to how many people are affected. So you're in an emergency room or in your office and you see a 14-year-old girl who comes in and she's short of breath. She's an asthmatic. She's well controlled on medication, but and her asthma is worse. So she's got an exacerbation of asthma. She's a track athlete. She loves running, and she was running yesterday for 2 hours. She doesn't smoke. No one at home smokes. So what are the possible triggers for the worsening of her asthma? There are many triggers. She could have an upper respiratory virus. Somebody at home could be smoking. Maybe she's 14, she's not taking her medication. But could air pollution be aggravating her asthma? And the answer is yes, and there's very good evidence for that, and I'll show you some of the evidence later. And where could she be exposed to air pollution? So, pardon? On the streets running, yeah. So when you're running, more air is moving through your lungs, the vital capacity is increased, the flow through is increased, and certainly running close to traffic, she might have been exposed to air pollution, which aggravated her asthma, caused an exacerbation. But she could have been exposed in the home. So in some countries in the world, and Brazil, there's some people who still use wood and coal or charcoal to heat their homes. So in many parts of the world, this is a major pollutant. Environmental tobacco smoke, and then allergens could have exacerbated. Certainly in North America, we have house dust mite, but pet allergens, cockroach allergens could have exacerbated their asthma. And then outdoor air pollution. So what's made inside goes outside. So if you're burning wood or coal in your wood stove inside, it pollutes the environment. But what's outdoors comes into your homes as well. So outdoor air pollution comes in. Traffic is a big pollutant, industrial emissions, waste burning, and then dust that's brought up by vehicle traffic, etc. Exercising outdoors, we talked about that. And then a lot of people are exposed in their workplaces, and that's not going to be a focus of my talk right now. Now, this is a very important case. This is the similar case, but it's a 61-year-old man who comes into emergency with atrial fibrillation. He's hypertensive, he's well controlled. He's also a runner, and he was running. Could air pollution be a trigger for his cardiac problem, his arrhythmia? So we think about air pollution. It's intuitive that it goes into the lungs and affects our lungs. It makes sense. But this connection is important because more people are sick and more people die, the link from air pollution to heart disease than from respiratory disease. And it's more difficult to understand. So I'm going to show you some of the evidence about this. And I'm going to start with the link between air pollution and health, then talk about how many people are affected, the burden of illness, talk about what the pollutants are, talk about household air pollution itself, and then talk about what we can do. And some of this has already been covered by Andy and Enrique and Carlos. And then the links to planetary health. So we divide exposure to air pollution into two categories. One is short-term exposure. I showed you there day-to-day changes in air pollution in Porto Alegre. Ours today is short-term changes, and it can exacerbate, as we talked about, asthma, can exacerbate COPD, and importantly, it can also exacerbate pre-existing cardiovascular disease and all the categories of cardiovascular disease: ischemia, heart failure, arrhythmia, and ischemic stroke. And that's a huge unexplored, or not unexplored, the science is good, unrecognized issue. Here's a study done, published in the New England Journal, done in London, England, where they took asthmatics, and the asthmatics walked on 2 different days, exercised, walked for 2 hours. They weren't running, they were walking. They walked in 2 environments. One is on Oxford Street, a very busy street with a lot of diesel traffic. And the second was in Hyde Park, a few miles away, but away from the traffic. And as Dr. Dora mentioned, green space cleans the air. And this is the response in the FEV1. So the open boxes is people walking in Hyde Park, and there's a little change in the FEV1. But when they're walking in the more polluted environment, they get a significant drop in the FEV1. It happens fast, within an hour. And when they came back 24 hours later, the FEV1 was still compromised. So you can see some of the mechanisms of the effect on the respiratory system. So air pollution and asthma, we know that I just showed you that there's a short-term effect. What about a long-term effect? Does air pollution cause asthma? And it's been well shown recently that it does cause a new onset of asthma. If you're exposed to air pollution, especially traffic-related air pollution, at an early age, up to the age of about 4, you're more likely to develop new onset asthma because of the air related to the air pollution. So what about long-term exposure? This is exposure about where you live, where you work, where you go to school. So exposure over weeks and months and years. There's increased mortality, and we've heard the figure, 7 million. There's increased incidence of lung cancer, and I'll show you some studies about that. New onset of asthma and COPD, and reduced lung function. So children in California growing up in communities that had clean air had larger lung capacity than children growing up in communities that had poorer air. So this is a significant factor probably in later life. Cardiovascular, besides the acute effects, the long-term effects is that air pollution actually promotes the development of atherosclerosis. There are pregnancy effects, which are similar to smoking, not as potent as smoking, but similar to smoking. And then recently, because air pollution causes inflammation, there's all sorts of other effects. So some effects on cognition, on brain development, and dementia, effects on the skin in terms of dermatitis. So all sorts of other effects and some rheumatological effects as well. So what's the mechanism, the pathophysiological mechanism of air pollution? It's a very complicated slide, but I'll walk you through it. This is the particulate matter, the small particles. Soot, smoke is particles that you can see. These particles are 2.5, very small and get deep into the lungs. So how do they work? What do they do to the body? There are 3 mechanisms. The first one here is they get into the alveoli, and they're complex particles, some of them with metals on them, some of them with ions on them, and they cause inflammation. So they cause oxidative stress and inflammation in the lungs, and then some of this inflammation spills over into the systemic circulation, and you get numerous effects on the vasculature and on metabolism. So you get some endothelial dysfunction from this inflammatory effects. The second mechanism I find very interesting is in the lungs. You get effects on the autonomic nervous system, and you get increased sympathetic stimulation, decreased parasympathetic, and so you're more likely to get arrhythmias, heart rate abnormalities. And the third effect is some of the particles are very small and actually can cross over into the vasculature, into the blood, and so that they have effects elsewhere in the body on the vasculature, and on the blood. So very complex. It's clearly understood. This isn't science fiction. This is reality, it's very helpful to link our understanding through these mechanisms. What about lung cancer? So here's somebody with a lung cancer. Could environmental exposures cause lung cancer? And I'm going to give you two examples, one in Sao Paulo and one in New Delhi. So the work in Sao Paulo is just about to be published in Environmental Research, so it's not published yet. Paulo Saldiva is the well-known researcher in Sao Paulo in air pollution. He's a pathologist. And what his team did is they did autopsies on 413 cases of people living in Sao Paulo, where the PM 2.5, the average is 25. So the WHO safe level is 10. So it's about 2.5. And then they measured the amount of black carbon accumulated in their lungs in postmortems. What they found was that the time spent in traffic correlated with the amount of black carbon in their lungs. Smoking correlated, but time spent in traffic correlated as well. And what they felt was that the carbon load from living in a city in Sao Paulo was equivalent to smoking 5 cigarettes a day, which I find quite stunning. But Sao Paulo, people spend a lot of time in traffic. I understand that. What about New Delhi? So at the conference, the WHO conference in Geneva, Dr. Arvind Kumar, who is a thoracic surgeon in Delhi, presented the study. He says there are no non-smokers in New Delhi. Everyone in Delhi, from infants on, from our friend over here, smokes the equivalent of 7 cigarettes a day from air pollution. In his operating room, he says there's a changing incidence of lung cancer. He's seeing it non-smokers equal to smokers, women catching up with men, and ages as young as 35 to 40. So a 35-year-old in New Delhi has been exposed to 7 cigarettes a day for 35 years. So it's quite impressive findings. Now, in the general population, there's some people who are more sensitive than others, more vulnerable than others to air pollution. So people with existing heart and lung disease, we've talked about that. Diabetics, because they have more inflammation in their systems and more prone to more inflammation. The elderly and young children. Young children are more exposed or more vulnerable because they're breathing faster than us. On a day like this, when we're sitting in an indoor environment which has filtered air, they're outside running around in the playground, I hope. And their lungs are developing, so they're more vulnerable. And there's a lot of work about children. So it's an important group to focus on. We talked about the fetus and pregnancy. People who are active outdoors, we talked about that. Not just people running, but people working outdoors. We talked about people, workers being vulnerable to heat. They're vulnerable to air pollution as well. And poorer people are more exposed than people who can afford air conditioning, live in more sealed housing. And in North America, I don't know if it's the same in Brazil, but in North America, traditionally the wind blows from the west. So the east parts of city where the pollution was going is where the poorer people were housed. What's the burden of illness? We talked about, from outdoor air pollution, 3.7 million premature deaths per year. If you combine that with household air pollution, which I'll show you later, it gets to 7 million a year. So, as Enrique mentioned, it's the 5th ranking mortality risk factor. And this is the combination of ambient and household air pollution. And you can see the areas of the world that are more affected, very similar to the climate change, but Europe, to a large degree, and North America are protected. And you can see that there's significant elevations in South America, but much more with this combination of household air pollution, so people burning wood and coal and dung indoors and then outdoors, this combination of indoor and outdoor being elevated in Africa and in Asia. What are the pollutants that affect us? So I've mentioned some of them. The 5 major outdoor air pollutants are particulate matter. So particulate matter, once again, is a hair on your head is 40 microns. these small particulates are 2.5 microns. What's important about that is they stay suspended in the air for long periods of time, and they get deep into the alveoli. So the size makes a big difference. Ozone is not released from the tailpipe of a car or a smokestack. It's made in the air by complex chemistry between other pollutants, including methane that comes from agriculture, and volatiles that come out of forests, and oxides of nitrogen that come out of cars. There's a complex chemistry, and often ozone is higher in downwind, so in the suburbs, rather than in the middle of the city, just because of the way the chemistry goes. Ozone requires heat and light to be formed, so that's why you probably see significant ozone in Porto Alegre. Oxide of nitrogen come out of tailpipes of car, as does carbon monoxide, and sulfur dioxide comes from burning of coal that has, mostly coal that has sulfur in it. And then traffic is obviously a major air pollutant. So the size of the particle matters. As you can see, the larger particles, somebody was talking yesterday telling us that he'd been cycling and his nose had black particles in it when he blew his nose. Now, in a way, he's lucky that the body system is filtering the larger particles in the nose. If you've ever hiked in the desert, your nose gets full of sand. That doesn't get down into the lungs. But these fine particles get down into the lungs, the PM2.5. And coming out of diesel, there's even smaller particles, less than 1 micron. They don't stay suspended for so long, so they're probably possibly less important than the 2.5 that stays suspended longer, but they can cross over into the circulation more and are very toxic. So there's a balance in a sense in the toxicity. I just wanted to show you this slide from Toronto to show the complexity of the air, of what goes on in the air. So this is my city. This is about 10 years ago, or 15 years ago. And the 3 pollutants that I'm going to mention are nitrogen dioxide, ozone, and PM2.5. So the nitrogen dioxide is the dotted lines, and you can see every 24 hours it's going up and down. That cycle is with the traffic. Every morning with rush hour, the nitrogen dioxide goes up and down. The ozone goes up and down in the afternoon because of the heat and light. And then the particulate matter is the gray line, and that is what happens in Toronto is we get particulate pollution blowing in from across the border in the United States, transboundary air pollution, and it stays suspended. So it gradually builds up over 3 days. You can see this buildup of the particulate matter. And we get very high combination of air pollutants in the air. So it's a very complex mixture that you're dealing with in any urban environment. Breathe Life, Dr. Dora mentioned that, and I think Enrique mentioned that. Doesn't exist in Porto Alegre. I think you need monitoring before you can join Breathe Life. But the Mr. Scarboza, the municipal councillor, I think he's left. Okay, be a great project to get Porto Alegre signed up to Breathe Life. What it does, it's an international effort. Cities sign up, and then they publish their annual average level of air pollution and show you the number of people affected. So this is Sao Paulo. The average level is about 16 micrograms per meter cubed, 60% above the WHO level, and then they give you a number of people affected. So it says 66,000 annual deaths from air pollution in in Sao Paulo. So you can go on this website. It gives you lots of advice about how to protect yourself and do things, reduce air pollution. It's a very interesting initiative that's starting out. So I tried to give you some content from your country. Here are the annual means. So this is 2012. The WHO said that the average level was 16. This gives the average level in micrograms per meter, the annual mean of 28, which is much greater. And does mention Porto Alegre, about 13 micrograms per meter cubed, which is above the WHO level. These are the annual means, and then it gives you the excess and the mortality rate. And I won't go into that in detail, but there is data from research projects about the air in Porto Alegre, but it's very difficult to find any ongoing accurate measurement, reliable measurement. Yeah. And once again, some Brazilian figures, but related to international figures. You can here see Beijing and Shanghai. Their particulate levels averages are 80 and 50. The megacities in India, New Delhi, and Mumbai are greater than that. But you can see that, that Paris is similar in a way to Sao Paulo. And Santiago is probably one of the most polluted areas in South America because of the geography. The winds blow in from the ocean and are up against the mountain, and the air pollution sits there. In many parts of the world, you have air quality index, which is a report every 2 or 3 hours of the air pollution. So it's as a number, and then the number links to the health effects. And there are messages for the general population and then for people with heart disease and lung disease. So the index would take a measure of the air pollution and convert it into a number and a color and then give a message. So at this level, it might say people with respiratory or heart disease, the elderly and children, these are our vulnerable patients, should avoid any outdoor activity. So going outdoors is hazardous to your health at that level. Everyone else, so people who aren't especially vulnerable, should avoid prolonged exercise, so outdoor exercise. So there's warnings like that that come with these air quality systems that are growing throughout the world. So here's another case. It's a 3-year-old boy in a rural clinic. He has a fever, and on examination, he's breathing fast, and you listen to his chest, and he's got pneumonia. So he's a little boy with pneumonia. Clearly, you put him on amoxil, and you send him home and instruct the parents to bring him back if he gets worse. But then you have to think further than that. Why has he got pneumonia? Is air pollution a factor? And what other history would you want to ask to understand that? So in this case, you'd want to ask, where does he live? So this is a typical case in Africa or Asia where people heat and cook indoors with charcoal or wood or coal or crop waste or dung, or they use kerosene, which is also very dirty, or they use kerosene as lighting, which is also very dirty. So household air pollution is a major issue. It's not just, as I mentioned, not just in the home where the levels are very high inside the house, but obviously it escapes from the house and the whole neighborhood is affected. This child might have might live near an industry. He might have been near traffic with his mum. We've seen this little baby with Sonia. His mother might be working in where she's exposed and have the baby on her back or with her. Or there might be waste burning. So garden waste being burnt is very toxic. And it's important to ask this family, this mother, who else might be at risk. Because if the mother's cooking on the stove, she's at risk. If there are other children playing around indoors, they're at risk. So you can go from the office, from the presentation of pneumonia, back into prevention of other kids and thinking about the environmental determinant of that pneumonia. This is a nice tool. This is a tool that we hope to develop more in collaboration with WHO. A clinical screening tool for air pollution. It's really like the Framingham of air pollution. And I don't think you can read it, but it has a number of questions. So the question about household air pollution, it asks that you would ask your patient, does your household burn solid fuels, wood, coal, charcoal, dung, or agricultural residues for cooking, heating, lighting, or any other purposes? And if yes, then you go into more history. And then the second part is outdoor air pollution. You start taking that environmental exposure history. You ask, do you live or work in an urban industrial center? Yes or no? Do you spend time near heavy traffic? So it's a very quick, similar to working out a Framingham risk, quick way to ask your patient or take a history from your patient about their possible exposure to air pollution that you can relate then to their illness. So what's the evidence about pneumonia and air pollution? Well, over here are the levels of pollutants inside a house. Over here is outdoor air pollution. And over here is levels, the blue sign here is levels of secondhand smoke. You can see that the levels of particulate pollution indoors are enormously high and are strongly related to pneumonia. Here's the WHO target for indoor air, and it's until you get well below the target that the risk of air pollution, of pneumonia from air pollution drops. How many people use wood stoves for heating and cooking in South America? In Brazil, 28% of rural populations. In your population, you see? In your house? But you don't use it every day, do you? Oh, in wintertime you do? Yeah. But your stove has a chimney.
It's not completely...
It's not efficient, yeah, yeah. Well, if you change to efficient, your children's lungs would do better. But we can talk about that. Other countries, your neighbors, certainly Peru has a very high use of solid fuels indoors. So household air pollution, 3 billion people use this. Women and children are more exposed, and this huge 4.3 million people dying because of this. Okay. So what can health professionals do? In the office, if you control your patient better, they're less likely to get an exacerbation. So if asthma is well controlled or heart failure is well controlled, they're less likely to get sick. You can talk about reducing exposure, exercising away from traffic. If you have an air quality index that measures the daily pollution, you can talk about them protecting themselves in that way. Some people wear masks. Masks do reduce particulate pollution, but masks leak. Masks leak even more when you're exercising. Masks leak even more when you have a beard. We know about masks. We had a SARS outbreak in Toronto 15 years ago, and we had to be fitted with N95 masks to work with patients who might have been sick. It's very difficult to get a good fit. But in air pollution, you don't have to take out every particle. So with SARS, you had to take out every viral particle, otherwise, or Ebola, otherwise you get sick. With air pollution, you have to reduce the load. So they do work. You have to buy, it costs about $2, $2 US dollars a mask, but they do work fairly well. There's some dispute about that. Air purifiers, you can buy indoor air purifiers called HEPA filters, high efficiency particulate air filters. If somebody's particularly sensitive, they do reduce the particulate load in a room or at a house if it's big enough, but it's hard to do the whole house. And antioxidants, there's some evidence for them being somewhat effective. But I think most important, or equally important, is our role as health professionals, and Carlos talked about that, and Enrique talked about that. I think the idea of getting low-cost monitors and having health professionals use those, as you mentioned, is a good idea to inform yourself and inform your community, and then to work in collaboration with other partners, and I won't go into that because Carlos covered that, in relation to both outdoor and household air pollution. So with household air pollution, what can people do? There are two approaches. The one approach has been to make the available clean. So to take the stoves and make the stoves cleaner, or to improve the chimneys. But what's most effective is actually to change the fuel, is to switch from burning wood or coal or dung to something much cleaner like liquid petroleum gas. And in India, there are great strides based on this understanding of the toxicity of household air pollution. A very impressive project in India to bring LPG to people's homes and to create smokeless villages. which is a great effort. What are the benefits of switching to cleaner fuels? So health, we've talked about that. You don't cut down wood, so you improve the forests. You reduce greenhouse gases. And besides greenhouse gases, the short-term climate pollutants, so inefficient stoves create soot, black soot that you can see, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. If you can reduce that, you reduce both the climate change and health. And the other thing is that women and young girls go out to collect the wood, and they then not able to go to school, and they open to violence. So switching away from this has numerous effects on many layers. I wanted to show this short video. If you could show the video. Conseguiu com a internet? There's a little bit of an energy problem. So maybe we can... So this is about an effort to reduce air pollution in Asia. So interesting quick take on big picture interventions to reduce air pollution that I thought would be interesting. The Climate and Clean Air Coalition produced that in Asia, and they're doing very good work. So cruise their website sometime. Incidentally, in Canada, certainly we have traffic air pollution, we have industrial air pollution, we have industrial air pollution coming from the US, but the new air pollution is forest fires. That's related to climate change. So with climate change, the forest is drying out. There's a certain beetle that attacks the forests that is living in northern Canada that didn't live there before until climate change. And so our forests are very vulnerable. And over the last 3 summers, the west part of our country has been blanketed with smoke. And so people living in beautiful British Columbia have had smoke all summer, and our summers are precious to us. So it's a major issue affecting our country. So what's the link to planetary health? Climate warming of the climate creates more pollution in a couple of ways. Ozone is dependent on the heat to be made, so you get more ozone more frequently. And allergens. So somebody I was talking to today is suffering from springtime allergies, but the plants are growing more vigorously because of CO2, and the growing season is longer, certainly in North America, so my patients are having more allergens. Reducing climate change agents reduces air pollution. So reducing CO2, if you do anything to reduce CO2, your car's cleaner, industry's cleaner, you're reducing particulate matter as well. But importantly also, there's this other group of climate pollutants called the short-lived climate pollutants, which are black carbon, which is the soot that's coming out of cars, methane that comes out of agriculture, and ozone pollutants. These are the short-term air pollutants. If you reduce those, you reduce air pollution. And thirdly, there are these co-benefits that we talked about. So if you encourage active transportation, and the councillor is here, he's a great cycling advocate, I fully endorse that. If you start cycling, you reduce your CO2 emissions, you reduce air pollution, and you get healthier. If you eat lower on the food chain or eat vegetarian, there were some vegans last night, once again, you make yourself healthier, there are lesser emissions of both climate pollutants and air pollutants. And same with cleaning up the air as you heat your house. So lastly, I just wanted to mention this program that Enrique talked about. The World Organization of Family Doctors is about to embark on this project to train 40 health professionals around the world who will then become trainers themselves. All the training is done remotely, so online. If any of you are interested, please speak to Enrique, who was one of the first 3 trainers trained. But I think we're getting more sophisticated and better, and we want to give most of the trainers a personal monitor so that they can do some work in their communities. So this is a very exciting project to get health professionals more engaged. And obrigado. If you want to be in touch with me, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Alan. Thank you. Eu acho que a gente pode pegar 2 perguntas. Eu tenho muitas, então eu imagino que o pessoal vai ter. Alguém gostaria de fazer alguma pergunta?
Eu não sei que língua eu falo.
Acho que fala em inglês.
Ok.
Todo mundo tem.
Chega aqui. You have the.
You can speak in English?
No,
because
he has the translator. Ok. O Adroaldo e eu estamos iniciando um projeto em Porto Alegre de comprar esses medidores de poluição pessoais para ver se a gente consegue conscientizar um pouco a cidade da importância de medir a poluição e de prevenir. Que tu nos aconselharia de como fazer isso? A nossa brincadeira foi de que, ao final do dia de hoje, a gente tivesse 5 pessoas querendo medir, e que no ano que vem, nessa conferência, a gente apresentasse os resultados. Nós vamos um pouquinho além, pensando assim, nós estamos, Sérgio Sirena, nós estamos num contexto de que temos aqui o coordenador de pesquisa do GHC, então isso pode se tornar uma pesquisa do GHC, e pode ser um projeto do CREMERS como resultado desta conferência, que tem uma credibilidade incrível também na cidade de Porto Alegre. Nós vamos só até aí. O que tu pode nos sugerir?
Use this one. Okay.
I think the first thing to suggest is to think about the reliability. Well, first of all, I think it's a great idea. But the reliability of the monitors is very important. And Carlos Dora's team is looking at that within WHO. And so I think talking with him about which monitor, how expensive you go, is very important, because the credibility is very important. And some monitors, it depends on where you are. You have to speak to, the WHO is doing a literature review on that, and it's being published, I think, in the next 3 months or so, so that should be available. I think that's a really important issue, to find a credible monitor. I think this information coming from health is really important. I think if you can link with the environment, if there are people working in the environment ministry or the municipal environment ministry, linking with the municipality and councillors is very important to transmit that information. And perhaps also talking to the group in Sao Paulo, Paulo Saldivi's group, who might know about personal monitors used in Sao Paulo that might be appropriate here, would be a good idea. I think it's a great idea. And then having health practitioners communicate that to their communities, I think is a very powerful tool.
Do you mind if I comment a little bit? Então, eu teria dois comentários, né? O primeiro foi, ouvindo essa conversa, né, e olhando para o Carlos Dora, talvez criar um certificado da OMS para os monitores. Porque assim como eu, que já estou conversando com o Alan sobre qual o melhor monitor para comprar, e por isso a gente ainda não comprou, é difícil da gente ter uma... Então, talvez fosse uma coisa que desse um pouquinho de mais confiança para as pessoas investirem nesse tipo de equipamento, né? Então, ter um certificado da OMS, acho que talvez seja possível. A segunda coisa, o ONCA, né, a Organização Mundial dos Médicos de Família, vai se associar à maior rede de ativismo, exatamente fazendo o que você está propondo, né? E que trabalha junto com a OMS, junto com o Breathe Life, que é a Climate and Air Coalition. Tá? Talvez eu esteja confundido. A gente pode talvez convidar a Jenny Miller para vir falar sobre ativismo, né? E talvez sobre ciência cidadã, que eu acho que é o que você está trazendo. Ano que vem, talvez, Sérgio. Última pergunta do Eno, e aí depois a gente termina.
So Enrique was referring to another group called Unmask My City, which is this coalition that's actually right now giving personal monitors, so they have experience with that, to healthcare practitioners. And so there's a website called Unmask My City, Take Off the Mask.
Bem, como o Henrique disse, nós médicos de família tentamos ser muito práticos. Então, eu gostaria de ter a informação se já está estimado o número necessário de pessoas expostas ao fogão a lenha em casa e em quanto tempo para que a gente tenha uma pneumonia ou outro desfecho negativo. E, por outro lado, se em algum lugar do mundo já se testou uma intervenção, né, então, de quantas pessoas precisariam receber essa intervenção para proteger uma pessoa de um desfecho negativo. E acho que, se nós fôssemos pensar em algum estudo, seria algo que pudesse ter, assim, um dado prático como resultado. Quer dizer, qual é a intervenção que nós precisamos fazer para que seja economicamente interessante, inclusive, que haja subsídios para que essa intervenção seja disseminada na população que hoje está exposta a risco. NNT, NNH. Obrigado.
So I think I don't know the situation in southern Brazil specifically, but and it depends on the type of wood stove. So if it's a wood stove that has a chimney, there's the levels of pollutant would be not as high as somebody burning on an open fire in a very underprivileged society. But in Canada, we've had two interventions. One in Montreal, in Quebec. In the last few months, they banned wood burning. Very controversial because people were heating their homes with that, and it's cheaper than connecting to a system of gas. But the cost-benefit analysis that Dr. Dora talked about yesterday showed very clearly that that moving away from wood burning would have huge benefits for the community as a whole. So that's one intervention, a very radical intervention. Another intervention coming from Canada is that in British Columbia, the government gave subsidies to people so that they could move from one wood stove to a certified wood stove, which has much less emissions. So the wood stove has reburns and has filters in it, and so the emissions in the home and into the community are much lower. So there are programs to upgrade wood stoves, and I'll talk with you about that and inspect your wood stove. But it costs money to do that. So you have to do the cost-benefit analysis. I hope that's answered your question.
Eno, uma das coisas que a gente está falando é criar uma ferramenta tipo o Framingham, né? E a gente tem conversado e ele está mais conectado com os cardiologistas dos Estados Unidos e está tentando chegar no NNT, NNH. Eu não sei se a gente tem esse tipo de dado com tanta clareza ainda. Tá, muito obrigado.
Obrigado.